This and all talks at the 2019 JavaScript for WordPress Conference are brought to you in part by our sponsors Pantheon, a high-performance hosting platform with agile developer tools. Check them out at pantheon.io.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second talk in the Gutenberg track. I'm here with Craig, who will be talking about some JavaScript in WordPress. Just a small bio about our speaker. Craig is a husband, father, code wrangler, open source contributor, and basketball fan. He writes JavaScript at Automatic and contributes to WordPress core. And with that, I will give the microphone to you, and good talk.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited about this conference and the opportunity to talk on how to grow your skills with WordPress. Big shout out to Zach for organizing this event, packed with so many great topics discussed throughout the day. Let me start with explaining what I'm about to cover today. WordPress has always been recognized as a very welcoming platform for developers and any levels of expertise. The block editor, introduced in WordPress 5.0 release, is not only an entirely new editing experience for users, but it also redefines the way plugins and themes are developed. In this talk, I want to explain many of the architectural decisions that have sought to make the transition as smooth as possible for those familiar with WordPress development. I will discuss all the tooling that the Gutenberg project uses behind the scenes to benefit from the massive growth of the JavaScript ecosystem. Finally, I'd like to demonstrate how you can leverage the same software in your project using the WordPress script package to improve your skills. First, let's take a step back and try to understand better what role JavaScript has played in the WordPress software since its initial 1.0 release. Thanks to version control system, we can travel back in time and inspect the old source code shipped 15 years ago. It turns out that there isn't much JavaScript code there. There was only one external file loaded with the script tag. All the remaining client-side code is inlined in PHP files with the logic that generates HTML output. I don't find it surprising at all because it perfectly reflects what role JavaScript played at the beginning of the 21st century. It was used mostly for page redirects, showing alerts, handling forms, and all that jazz. The page load handler from the actual code seems to be a good illustration of how state-of-the-art looked back then. In the following years, we observe an increasing role of JavaScript, which resulted in the arrival of first libraries. They played a crucial role in making cross-browser development much more manageable, allowing to create advanced user interaction with less work. Besides, Ajax marked the mainstream breakthrough of JavaScript, making full page reload no longer the only possibility. TinyMC is an online-rich text editor and the first advanced JavaScript library added to WordPress core in the 2.0 release in December 2005, as you can see on the screen. It proved to be a long-lasting piece of technology, shaping the evolution of WordPress content editing for the next 13 years. It didn't take much time to see jQuery integrated into the codebase less than a year after its debut in August 2006. As it turned out later, jQuery, the most popular JavaScript library ever, was added in WordPress 2.2 release. Around the year 2010, first JavaScript frameworks were born. WordPress core developers bet on Backbone, a library with a RESTful JSON interface based on the model view presenter application design paradigm. Backbone was included in WordPress 3.5 release at the end of 2012. All those technologies shaped how users edit their content, customize themes, or manage media in WordPress. There are also other notable events that happen in parallel, which initially didn't impact WordPress software. I see them as the turning point for JavaScript to become a genuinely general-purpose language and let it dominate front-end development. In November 2009, Ryan Dahl announced Node.js, a server-side JavaScript platform, which allowed programmers not only to code in a familiar language, but also share the same logic between client and server. Soon after, development started on the Node Package Manager, or NPM for short, intending to make it easy to share code between projects. The NPM registry eventually became the world's largest software registry with over 1 million open-source JavaScript packages hosted as of today. In May 2013, Facebook announced they open source a new library called React for building complex user interfaces. React took a revolutionary approach of declarative views composed of components that manage their state and keep it out of the DOM. A few years later, React can also render on the server using Node.js, and it powers native mobile apps using React Native. It's important to mention that React's model was influential, and today's framework landscape, see Vue, Angular, or Preact, is very different thanks to it. Now, let's completely change the topic for a brief moment and discuss how the Gutenberg project is transforming the way content is created on WordPress. The block editor was the first product launch, introducing a new approach for working with posts and pages. Blocks are an abstract unit for organizing and composing the content for a web page. Blocks are hierarchical, in that a block can be a child or parent to another block. One example is the group block, which can be the parent block to multiple child block. Under the umbrella term block, we can also unify multiple different existing WordPress interfaces into one. If we look under the hood, blocks are a helpful tool to describe how to edit content stored as HTML. What stands out are the HTML comments used, which can contain additional attributes encoded in JSON format. It's a way to provide explicit but invisible for the user demarcation between blocks. However, during runtime, the HTML markup gets parsed and converted to a tree of objects and associated attributes, which are kept in memory. It allows recreating the internal data tree of the collection of blocks whenever a post is to be edited again. The example included demonstrates the idea in a very simplified way. Putting all that together, I want to emphasize that the content produced by Gutenberg isn't designed for manual modification. That's why we can think of the individual block as an independent app, which in the browser happens to be implemented with JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Gutenberg, to fulfill all the requirements stated above, uses technology stack entirely different than the one described when I was talking about WordPress history. Let's try to discover why using jQuery, Backbone, or TinyMC could only take us so far, and how it led to extended exploration to find some suitable replacements. I'm sure there is more, but I want to highlight some significant issues with those libraries based on my experience. jQuery did an exceptional job of hiding all the complexity of all those small differences between DOM implementation in different browsers. It ironically forced browser vendors to fix them on their site eventually, so it isn't that much of an issue anymore. More importantly, the fact that jQuery highly depends on DOM makes it nearly impossible to manage shared state when multiple sources want to modify it. In other words, using HTML data attributes has limited application in this context. Backbone help to solve some of the issues discussed jQuery struggles with. By introducing the concept of views and models, however, it turns out that this approach doesn't scale well either. The biggest challenge remains unsolved. That's how to ensure that all models which communicate with REST API can stay in sync with each other in an environment where everything needs to react to events from multiple, highly interconnected sources. So you are probably wondering now, why would React be any better? I wasn't involved in the development process of the block editor early on. I joined the core team sometime after everyone could install and test the Gutenberg plugin. With that in mind, I want to share massive admiration for how the block paradigm aligns with the React architecture and the concept of components. Suddenly, you can easily pass data through your app and keep the state out of the DOM. In principle, you no longer have to worry about manipulating DOM anymore because React handles it behind the scenes by using its own virtual DOM. It not only improves performance, but also allows to process React-based code outside of the browser. There is another aspect which other libraries solve: how to efficiently manage the application's shared state, like the list of blocks inserted in the editor. Redux has a reputation for being difficult to follow, though. However, there was an excellent way to address it by sticking as close as possible to its most straightforward concept and limiting exposure to the internal machinery. The final solution includes multiple stores where each plugin has the freedom to define its isolated state, which plays nicely with the need for having the WordPress core highly extensible. Continuing on the last point, WordPress extensibility lies in the thousands of hooks at your disposal on the PHP side of things. The WordPress APIs allow you to change the default behavior within WordPress and add your functionality without modifying core files at all. However, it won't replicate the same patterns on the client side in the pre-Gutenberg world because formal APIs were missing. Developers could still work around it by using hooks on the servers to customize the initial HTML output rendered, and then sprinkle some jQuery code to change user interactions. This approach is extremely fragile, as it highly depends on the DOM structure. Applying the concept of WordPress hooks in JavaScript was essential when architecting the block editor. Beyond mere compatibility, it embraces the potential of the plugin and offers the tooling necessary to enhance the experience. Actions and filters are undeniably familiar to WordPress developers and largely contribute to the success of this CMS. Besides, the patterns exposed to plugin and theme authors are the same that the block editor's interface or core block use internally. The way extensibility is implemented still evolves to accommodate all the challenges that asynchronous nature of JavaScript introduces. It's also a big subject on its own, and therefore better suited for separate consideration. To add more to it, there are upcoming talks today about this topic, so you better check them out if you are interested to learn more. Finally, WordPress 5.0 introduces many new bundled script handles, including many specific to the new block editor, as well as a few vendor dependencies. All new WordPress-specific JavaScript code is registered using WP/ as a prefix for the script handle. Each WordPress module assigns itself to the global scope under the WP namespace. It's the same pattern that much of the existing WordPress custom JavaScript functionality used before on the admin and editor screens. For example, if your theme or plugin includes WP components, it makes it available at window.wp.components in your browser. The idea is to bridge that generation in a way where new code remains approachable for those who have become accustomed to the old way, while still pushing the boundaries towards modern development. In addition to that, all new modules are regularly published to NPM as independent packages under the WordPress organization. The best part is that you can use any of over 60 packages in other JavaScript-based projects. It's possible because they are shaped after the task they're trying to solve, which makes them genuinely general purpose and thus maximizes towards code reuse. It's also self-evident that you cannot expect any developer to have a full understanding of a complex system, so having small modules with dependencies defined between each other helps a lot. This approach so far seems to be successful, as it has already provided a viable way to integrate the Gutenberg editor in Drupal and Laravel project. Isn't it powerful? It also allowed sharing the same codebase to build the native mobile version of Gutenberg written in React Native. Both Android and iOS versions of the WordPress mobile apps offer support for the most popular core blocks when editing posts or pages. There are exciting plans for the future where we envision that developers are equipped with ways to build cross-platform blocks or UI plugins which adapt to the context where they are used. To get us there, we still need to develop a compatibility layer which hides HTML syntax used for web. Such a collection of components should abstract away DOM and let it translate to native alternatives included in React Native. Now let's try to find all those points that might help us developers with a day-to-day work. I hope that you agree that the JavaScript ecosystem has reached an exciting point in its history. On the one hand, there are members of the community overwhelmed by the learning curve required to discover the magnitude of newly introduced language features and accompanying tools. It makes it feel like starting a new project is a big challenge on its own, and based on that, some programmers express so-called JavaScript fatigue. On the other hand, some celebrate this era as the renaissance of JavaScript. It stems from the fact that currently you can create anything you want using this language: client and servers, command line utilities, games, and the like. You can even control hardware devices. The sky's the limit. WordPress JavaScript core from the start of the project has to battle an apparent difficulty: how to take advantage of all variety of existing modern tools and new language features to empower developers. At the same time, it's essential to change the first impression that building JavaScript-based user interfaces is so complicated. There is an obvious solution which Man Mullenweg suggested in his keynote at WordCamp US back in 2015. Learn JavaScript deeply. However, it takes time, a massive amount of time, as we can learn from the progress in the last 4 years. That's why I'd like to discuss some strategies which WordPress core embodied to make it easier to get up to speed when working with Gutenberg. For simplicity, it's still possible to program using ECMAScript 5 or ES5 for short. This well-established edition of JavaScript standard can run straight in the vast majority of browsers and doesn't require an additional build step. It's also what you would use in WordPress projects in the past. In many cases, it's perfectly fine to follow the same approach to start experimenting with your plugin or theme quickly. As soon as your codebase grows to hundreds of lines, it might be a good idea to get familiar with the build tools and set up development environment to use ES6 or JSX syntax. Let me ensure we are all on the same page. ES6 is JavaScript code written using features that are only available in specification updates published yearly starting from 2015. JSX is a custom syntax extension to JavaScript used with React, which helps you to describe the UI similar to a templating language based on HTML. Most browsers cannot interpret or run all ES6 features and JSX syntax, so we use a transformation step to convert this code back to the representation which browser can understand, which is ES5-based JavaScript as shown on the screen. There are a few reasons to use ES6 even though it adds extra effort. First, it offers a simpler code that is easier to read and write. Using a transformation step allows for tools to optimize the code to work on a large variety of browsers. Also, by using a build step, you can organize your code into smaller modules and files that can be bundled together into a single download. I hope to encourage you to set up a development environment to use the latest JavaScript syntax. I'm going to explain how to do it a bit later. I mentioned earlier that all modules developed for the block editor are exposed in the global scope under the WP namespace in WordPress. This approach makes it possible to reuse every part of public API even when you decide to stick with ES5 standard only. JavaScript as a language is fully backward compatible, which closely aligns with the philosophy that WordPress shares. In this place, I should also make it clear that even when you opt in for the build step to write your program with ES6 or JSX, it's perfectly fine to mix and match it with chunks of ES5 code freely. It's also fine to use all NPM packages discussed usually outside of WordPress. Core.js team put lots of care to ensure that the majority of them can work in any JavaScript project. You can even create your customized version of the block editor using all the Lego sets available. There is an example included in the Gutenberg project as well, and you can see it on the screen. This playground works fully outside of the WordPress context. There are also UI components which are contained in WordPress Components package, and they are my favorite. I hope they are going to evolve in the design system and the pattern library for all WordPress-based projects. When you decide to use them, you get an essential theming, unified behavior, and accessibility support out of the box. It should help to bring some consistency in your work and positively impact the broader ecosystem. Software testing helps protect the code from incoming bugs and improves the general quality of the functionalities exposed to the users. When you look at it from the developer standpoint, the first thing that comes to mind is unit testing. However, it turns out that verification comes in many flavors. Gutenberg itself contains both PHP and JavaScript code and encourages testing and code style linting for both. Tests are essential, but not only because they help to ensure that our application behaves as it should, but also because they provide concise example of how to use a piece of code. In particular, end-to-end testing involves ensuring that the integrated components of an application function as expected. The entire application is tested in a real-world scenario, such as communicating with the database, network, hardware, and other systems. When your plugin's codebase grows and the UI becomes complex, it pays off to invest time on the building test coverage using end-to-end approach. Linter is a tool that looks for issues in programs by scanning in source code. If it finds a problem like a syntax error, it returns a message describing an approximate location within the source file. Linter looks at some style convention violation or structural problems too. It doesn't prove that your code is correct, but only provides another set of files to help spot issues early on. It makes it extremely useful when you want to use new language features or new team member joins the project. Lastly, let's discuss how tools used internally in the Gutenberg projects can positively impact workloads used to develop plugins and themes for WordPress. Undeniably, when working seamlessly, sophisticated command line interfaces help to turn work with a project into a more pleasant experience. However, it's a misleading assumption that developers can easily pick the proper tool in the first place, and then ensure that they play along with each other, including all their extensions. Besides, it's still not enough because developers are left on their own to keep all configurations and dependent tools up to date. The problem multiplies when they support more than one project which shares the same setup. Fortunately, there is a pattern that can simplify maintenance life. Reusable scripts. The idea boils down to moving all the necessary configuration and scripts to one single tool dependency. WordPress Scripts is such collection of reusable scripts tailored for WordPress development. It's distributed as an NPM package which allows to seamlessly incorporate more advanced JavaScript tooling like build step, code transpilation, linting, or testing. It certainly isn't a novel approach. React scripts and KCD scripts packages were the source of inspiration and profoundly influenced the actual implementation. To set it up, you need to install one NPM module, as said earlier, WordPress Scripts. It offers a command line interface and exposes a binary called WP script, so you can call it directly with npx and npm package runner. However, this module is designed to be configured using the script sections in the package.json file of your project, as shown now. This comprehensive example demonstrates the most of the capabilities included. In most cases, it should be possible to accomplish all tasks using the recommended settings. While it's possible to override every single config file provider, if you have to do it, it means that your use case is far more complicated than anticipated. If that happens, it would be better to avoid using the whole abstraction layer and set up your project with full control over tooling used. Based on the feedback received so far, I can surely tell that setting up a development environment is the biggest hurdle for plugin developers when they want to build their features on top of Gutenberg. That's why there is build script, which transforms your code according to the configuration provided. So it's ready for production and optimized for the best performance. The entry point for your project code should be located in src/index.js, and the output will be generated in build/index.js. That's all what you need to do. The script exits after producing a single build. For incremental builds better suited for development, there is also start script, which basically is something similar, and it works in a watch mode, which means that whenever you modify any source file, it will build again and you will be able to see changes in your app. With a setup in place, the standard workflow looks as follows. You copy your project locally, you install dependency with npm install. Then you start development using npm start as described. Then you develop, test, repeat. As soon as you decide that your code is ready, then you can create production build using npm run build. I probably should mention that those scripts under the hood use highly popular tools like Webpack and Babel, but those are implementation details, and when you are using WordPress script, you shouldn't be worried about it. For instance, Webpack, it might be replaced with something else in the future. It all depends how the ecosystem evolves. Again, the default configuration should cover the most common use cases, but you can refer to the WordPress scripts documentation if you want to use multiple entry points, a different output directory, or something along those lines. I also wanted to highlight other handy tasks which are invaluable when you want to improve the quality of your code shipped regularly to users. Lint.js helps enforce coding style guides for JavaScript files and uses ESLint with the set of recommended rules defined in WordPress ESLint plugin NPM package. It won't be surprised if I tell you that we use exactly the same setup for Gutenberg development. There is also Test E2E, which launches the end-to-end TestRunner. Writing tests can be done using the Jest API in combination with the Puppeteer API. So let me explain what that means. Puppeteer provides a high-level API to control Chrome or Chromium over the DevTools protocol. It runs headlessly by default, which means it runs inside your terminal, but it can be also configured to run an actual browser. So I mentioned support for Chrome, but there is also work started by Mozilla team to bring Firefox integration with Puppeteer, and they track progress using the test suite written for the Gutenberg project. And finally, there is Test Unit, which launches the unit test runner. Writing tests can be done using the very popular tool called Jester. By default, it uses the set of recommended options defined in special preset created for Gutenberg, which also exposed as NPM package. There is more. You can learn more by browsing more detailed docs for WordPress Scripts package on NPM. There are a few things I would like to emphasize before I wrap up. good old ES5 standard is still relevant and can be used to extend the WordPress block editor features. ES Next and JX makes your life much easier, but it takes also lots of effort to get intimately familiar with them. You can reuse pieces of the Gutenberg projects at any level of granularity: packages, blocks, components, or even functions. You aren't tied to the WordPress ecosystem at all. Get familiar with modern JavaScript tools and start using only those which fit your use case. Exploring Use WordPress Scripts package should be an excellent way to start your journey and learn which workflows work for you best. Finally, learn JavaScript deeply and prosper. My name is Grzegorz Ziółkowski. I'm sponsored by Automatic to work full-time on WordPress core. You can find me online on GitHub, Twitter, or WordPress Slack under the GZIOLO handle. I will publish a blog post on my website based on this talk early next week. And now, thank you for watching.
Yeah.
There's one question I see. Is npm install normally done in the local project folder? Yes, exactly. It happens in the root of your project. So there is this package.json file which you can bootstrap using npm init command, and then you have everything set up. You can then start playing around with dependencies, and they will be installed inside the node modules subfolders in the root of the project.
Ryan also asked that most of the examples he sees for Gutenberg are ES6.
Yeah. I mean, I said this, that ES5 is perfectly fine if you want to start experiment quickly. The big advantage of doing so is that you can paste all the extensibility features inside JavaScript console in your browser, and they will work out of the box. So that's pretty convenient when you are, experimenting, playing along. However, when the project grows, as I mentioned, then ES5 doesn't scale well. And we use for Gutenberg project only ES5 code with JS6 baked in. So I reused examples from Gutenberg project, so that's why I'm using ES6. If that made it harder to follow, it wasn't intended.
Yeah, he also added that, is there a way to reverse engineer these examples to ES5? The documentation in ES5 is scanty.
Yeah, so Bubble does that behind the scenes. So I also showed the example on my slides when you have something that is produced by Bubble. And this tool basically takes ES6 and just converts it to something that browsers can understand. There are many configuration options, so it's not only ES5, you can also do something that modern browsers understand, so which is around 80-90% of market share. So you can use the scripts type module, HTML attribute, and then it works out of the box in Chrome, Firefox, and those browsers. So, but yeah, you can also transpile back to ES5. There is also the other way around. When you read Bubble backwards, it's LabUp. So there's another tool. So you can take ES5 code and translate it to ES6. It has some, ES6, ES Next. It has very limited capabilities, but it's quite nice for explorations and seeing how to, make your code a bit shorter, much leaner, and see how new features work.
Very cool. Benoit, I believe, is the first name, also asked that, can we expect to have SCSS, post-CSS support soon in WordPress scripts?
Yeah, there's open PR for that. I didn't see much progress lately on that one. It's definitely something you want to have included. The issue is that Gutenberg itself uses a bit different workflow. It's very tied to the way how we publish those NPM packages I talked about. So this is something that needs to go from plugin team developers, because this is where it can be exercised. We don't have, a shared way of doing that. Everything else besides CSS is done exactly the same in the WordPress script and in core. There are some subtle differences, but it's something you wouldn't notice.
Cool. Then Sunny asked, is there a local dev setup that makes building blocks quicker? Right now I have to edit the custom block code, refresh the WordPress admin, reinsert the block, and test and repeat. Is it possible to develop blocks without having to use the WordPress interface?
Right. So that's why there is this playground which Riyad, tech lead of the project, was working on recently. So that should be the way for the future for doing so, because you won't be developing inside the WordPress, so you can bring much more advanced tools to do so. So I know that Playground is using Parcel behind the scenes, so which works probably with hot reloading or very closely to that. I mean, it's really much faster to do so. So, but I don't think that I don't know anything about something that works, out of the box. I know that there were some works in the past to bring hot modular loading, which is a way to replace code inside the browser, but inside WordPress it can be still hard.
Yeah, I believe if I can jump in there is a repository by Human-Made on GitHub that does something in that direction, but I would have to check up on that as well. But you can search around for it.
Yeah, just to answer one of the questions, Paul, yes, I will definitely mention LabUp because it's quite interesting. I mean, I can even find now a link to that because I think I was playing around with it. Oh, yeah, thank you. So there is also this Gutenberg blockade. I haven't played with it yet, but yeah, it looked very promising and probably it will work the way you would like. I mean, it should be something that you see instant response. I think that the work we will be doing on React Native of bringing closer both platform, web and mobile, and to share more code in the future, that will also help us to bring those hot reloading features, because on React Native it's very advanced, and I know that core team, including Dan Abramov from the web team, they teamed up to make it really cool.
Cool. Then there was a question by Marcin. Did you try Create Gutenblock? What's your opinion on tools like this?
Oh yeah, so Create Gutenblock was the first tool that covered this scaffolding stuff in the project, which were JS based. I was working on WP CLI feature for scaffolding blocks, which is similar, but it's PHP based. So it, there are some requirements to make working with that. So I hope that we will have something for scaffolding plugins or blocks as soon as we will be more mature with the works on the single block directory, and that should help, to bring something, up to speed. So Create Gutenblock, I don't know what's the status of it at the moment. Last time I checked, it was a bit behind with tooling. So I hope that it, aligns, and then it's perfectly fine to use. It's just another tool. And I hope that you will be using WordPress Script, which I was referring so much in this talk, because I think that's quite important to have one way of building code inside the broader ecosystem of WordPress. Yeah, and there's also another work by Riyad, WP.js plugin starter, which is kind of scaffold block, to which you can now use GitHub feature to not clone the repository, but just reuse the same scaffold and start your project right away. I see that Riyad is killing all the answers for me, so thank you, Riyad.
Like you said, people should feel free to connect with you on Twitter and all the other places. And thank you so much for doing this talk. Thank you so much for your time.